I would love to kick it off with Rick and Ken. Give us kind of the lay of the land. Why should companies and countries actually adopt this global tech standard? Audrey gave us a great introduction, but I would love for you to kind of lay out the imperative, really, the why behind it should be adopted.
Excellent question, thank you. When you think of standards, you think of 1,000-page documents, you spend several $1,000s to get, and it comes from a group like ISO. Wonderful. We need to do a little something different. Trusted tech means many things to many people. In our document, the first 4 pages are critical. It's an 8-page document, easy to read, easy to digest. Why is that? We think there are 12 big buckets of technology ranging from autonomous vehicles, AI, quantum computing, hypersonics, that we really need to focus on as a nation and as in partner nations. And with those, we wrap around 10 ideas around trust. Technology is a thing. It's neither good nor bad. It's how you wield it, how you use it, how you think about it, how you regulate it. And that's what the 10 principles we have in the document are meant to remind you of. It's how we adopt and treat it. And in doing so, we think that it maps to many national standards that you can look to in order to decide about the trustworthiness of given tech and how you will make it trustworthy. It's a living document. And as I said earlier, Audrey said, we really welcome input because this represents our thinking. It's not everyone's thinking. And I'm sure there's other voices we need to hear too. And Rick?
I just wanted to add there's a really main reasons why people should support and join us in this effort is one, the ultimate outcome we want to deliver is trust. And there's a T word that's very important in trust, and it's the word teamwork. And I think there will be strength in numbers as we start collaborating on that ultimate outcome to do trust. And by delivering on trust, what we're going to really enable is another T word that Keith mentioned is transformation. And for some of us, Dr. Ken and I, we have a lot of examples where creating trust between entities has really unleashed and made that transformation possible. And that's why companies should be, that's really our responsibility as we develop the standard.
What are your thoughts on how it exists in the context of the other standards and frameworks already in place, whether it's in this space, but just broadly as well?
You know, the world of standards today for the outcome of trust is sort of a multi-dimensional system of systems. If you think about technology standards today, you have the standards around the 10 technologies that Dr. Ken talked about. Standards have a regional dimension, and they also have an asset dimension around the IP or the data, what you're trying to protect. So you have that cube there. And what we have the opportunity to do is really to optimize that, leverage the standards that exist, but take all this three-dimensional challenge that we have and sort of create that momentum around the ultimate, almost like a meta standard, that will help companies achieve trust.
Like with anything, especially when you're at the outset of creating a framework like this, there's going to be some tension between, innovation and a guideline. And Audrey, I'd love if you could kind of jump in here with what that tension looks like, how you can kind of balance, the innovators, the manufacturers of the technology with an initiative like this. How do you balance that at the outset?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we think about these meta standards, I don't think it's like just guardrails. It is also guide rails, making sure that innovators know where the baseline expectations are. For example, one of the baseline expectations is privacy. If I put in personal data in, I shouldn't actually leak that personal data through the technology to other people unrelated to it. But another principle within the standard is the adherence to the sanctions and the financial norms, international norms against sanctioned entities. And in emerging technologies, for example, in blockchain, sometimes these two are put forward as something that you have to choose one or the other, or there's a dial that you have to sacrifice some privacy to satisfy this sanctioned entities list or something. But then having this two together spelled out in meta standard says that we are posing a challenge to the blockchain innovators. Through zero knowledge, through privacy pools, through these cutting-edge technologies, they have to actually make both work instead of sacrificing one to the other. And I envision this like no compromise idea of trusted technology, really then ensuring that the technologies can win the hearts and mind of people so that people elect to use trusted technology, and that helps diffusion and that helps innovation.
Alex, I'd love if you could maybe jump in here with this challenge between setting some standards but not hindering innovation, and maybe what you think about what the political landscape might be able to either bring to the conversation, whether it's in a good way or perhaps in a way that detracts from these standards.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think to answer that question, we have to back up and sort of look at the whole geopolitical landscape that's evolving, right? So it's inevitable that the technology stacks in those 12 key areas, AI, semiconductors, hypersonics, et cetera, it's inevitable that they are not going to continue to bifurcate, right? They will continue to bifurcate. And that means that entire ecosystems are being transformed, supply chains are being transformed, data flows of human capital. And so from a collaboration or an innovation perspective, it is going to be more challenging than it was, say, a decade ago for universities, for companies, for many different entities to be able to collaborate and innovate. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we're also witnessing this great inflection point where the global economy is reorganizing strategically, and there are opportunities there. And that reorganization means that there will be new public-private partnerships that have to emerge, and that is really a big part of tech diplomacy, right? So for this innovation and collaboration to be maximized, there has to be an increase in G to G, government to government tech diplomacy, government to business tech diplomacy. And this whole idea of a reshored or a friend-shored supply chain environment is something that has to be taken into account, right? So I think it's really important to recognize that friends need friends now more than ever, right? To maximize this whole reorganization and bifurcation, which is inevitable in the marketplace.
I mean, there's been a real political upheaval, not just here in the United States, but as we see in France. And, we're not really sure what the rest of the political landscape around the world is going to look like as this standard gets off the ground. Audrey, I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe chime in on that front, how you see the political landscape affecting kind of not just this tension between innovation and responsible innovation, but what that might mean for a standard like this.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what we have seen in Taiwan over the past decade was that we started with a place with like very low trust from the people to the government's ability to navigate a emerging tech landscape. The trust level was 9% in 2014. We were able to make sure that we adopted the technology that earned the trust of the people and also that fostered the trust across the different polarized parts of the population so that the trust level became like over 70% by 2020. And the key here is just to focus on the common ground or the uncommon ground that both sides can agree. If you have experienced community nodes on x.com, previously Twitter, that is the kind of algorithms that the bridging systems that we deployed that is basically highlighting whatever the extreme right, extreme left are saying. These are the differences, and these are the one or two things that people can actually have a common idea, common experience around. And then we make sure that everybody knows about it. It's called pre-bunking. And so I think adopting the trusted technology idea just as a meme for people to rally around is one of those uncommon grounds that people in different jurisdictions, as long as they care about aligning technology to humanity, not the other way around, can actually agree on. And I think that will really help to have clarity on the political situation around technologies, especially about ethical uses of AI, aligning AI to humanity, which is one of the large issues nowadays, but also in all other emerging technologies.
Obi and Alec, I kind of want to shift now to perhaps some of the downstream effects that imposing or just setting up a set of guidelines and frameworks can have on the non-major players, the incumbents in a particular field. When we see some of these sorts of frameworks coming into place, one of the risks that we run is that it only benefits the incumbents and the major players, and that perhaps it overshadows the ability for smaller, more nimble companies and emerging economies to also contribute. So my question to you, maybe Obi, we can start off, is how will the global tech standard ensure that entrepreneurs from the global south, for instance, will not be left behind?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. I think that central to achieving that is from the outset determining that we don't want to repeat the perpetuation of the unequal opportunities that we've seen in our global economy thus far. It has become clear that a world that understands the value of trade, the value of creating as many multiple polars of growth or poles of growth is better for all of us in terms of the global prosperity than simply leaving some people outside of it. And so from the very design of this approach, especially since we agree that the global economic structure is once again changing. For example, Africa was not participant in the agrarian revolution, nor in the industrial revolution, nor in the early beginnings of, in fact, the knowledge revolution. However, when it's come to the ICT revolution, Africa has been very active in it. As a matter of fact, it is the revolution that our current generation of Africans know the most, and they've been participating in it. So when we get to standards, we do need to reflect very well to ensure that we're not designing in a way that puts anyone at a disadvantage. And so that's one. The second thing is I've had a lot of talk about our allies with the Americans speaking. Well, for too long, Africa was looked on as though it were just a humanitarian case. I am here to announce that Africa is not just a humanitarian case. Africa is a business case. As a matter of fact, the country that Michelle rightly advised you should not be building your policy around responding to them, discovered that better than you did. China is all over Africa. Have you asked yourself why that is so? It's because it's not looking at Africa as a humanitarian case. And I've said to the Chinese often, hey, I hope you don't think that you can repeat the behavior of extraction out of Africa in the 21st century. The younger version of Africans today are very energetic. They're going to be different in holding the feet of people to the fire. And that's important to understand. So for Africa, it's important that the United States and Europe smell the coffee. There's an opportunity there, especially with technology. So we do need to recognize that a continent that has an average age of 18.8 years compared to Europe at 44.6, China at 39.5, the US at 38.4, Latin America at 31, Asia at 32. Come on, the closest in terms of a young demographic is India, and even that is 28.9. So if you were thinking strategically, which continent would you be looking at as strong allies for this next wave of economic opportunity that we almost ride on, it would be Africa. So, thinking of it that way changes the approach that we're taking to ensuring that people are not left behind. And, frankly speaking, I'm a believer in the fact that in God we trust. Every other person must bring data. And so if everybody else must bring data, it means that we should be guided by what data tells us the future of the world would look like.
I think that's an amazing point. It's the business case, and we see very early signs that Africa as a continent, there's specific countries that are really contributing to the large language model development and the training that goes into some of the most advanced models that we use in chatbots today. That's not going to end. If anything, that's going to continue to expand. But you bring up this point that we've learned from lessons of the past, and the business case is different today. What are some of the kind of pitfalls you think we should be extra sensitive to be able to divert or to avert the same kind of results that we've fallen to in the past when some of these guidelines or frameworks are put into place?
There cannot be too much transparency. I think it's got to be transparency, transparency, transparency. And that's one. The second is we do need to make sure that cost effectiveness really supports the argument that you don't want to increase the transaction cost for territories, for regions that are already struggling in terms of cost of doing business. Thirdly, when we talk about the necessity to invest in education, a country like the United States should not be looking at, let's invest in education so our own diplomats can know what to say. That would be so self-sabotaging. I think that it would be important to look at what we currently are struggling with in terms of digital divide, right? And then to say, what kind of digital transformation skills do we really need to invest in? And how do we use public-private partnership and cross-border relationships to push this? Because the aggregate outcome is beneficial to the ones who have the resources to make this happen. Only on a business case basis, because it also would yield future promise and profit for everyone involved. So 3 things for me are key. Ensuring transparency. There can be too much transparency. I'm one of the co-founders of Transparency International. So I'm huge on transparency. You can never have too much transparency. That's absolutely number one. Number 2 is, of course, this whole idea, don't make it burdensome, don't make it costly, don't increase the asymmetry of information that then becomes really disadvantageous to parties that are outside of the nucleus of those that hold the ace right now, and basically ensuring also that we don't want to repeat this exclusionary kind of approach that sees women struggling to get into things. There are less women in the tech sector, and it's repeating the pattern of what we have in traditional economy. We can't afford to have that again. So we need representation, basically matters, and we must take heed of that. I think I end clearly on the note that standards are important for this next level of the global economy. But if we're doing it, we need to make sure that there is full representation. Who wants to have a repeat of the United Nations, where some group have such incredible advantage over others? We need to think of that design and know that our current multilateral system is struggling simply because of the unequal balance that lack of it that we have, and designed differently to ensure inclusion.
Alec, can you jump in here, because this issue of the digital divide has not gone anywhere. It's been, over a decade that it's been on many governments' minds. And how do they reskill? How do you prepare not just people, within your own borders, but those that want to come in and contribute to technology being fostered there? How do we ensure that it doesn't get wider, but that other emerging economies, nimbler startups, that not just the incumbents can benefit from this new era, and with the guidelines that are coming out alongside it?
G'day everybody. That's a very tough question that I'll do my best to answer. So Audrey talked about the standard providing not just guardrails but guide rails, and I think that's one of the key aspects that gives startups, early stage tech companies, a sense of what might seem impossible to become possible. And where I come from, a country that invented the science behind Wi-Fi.
You can brag.
Yeah, look, well, I mean, we didn't commercialize it, right? That's the real mistake. If we had, then we would be the richest country in the world. That's the crazy notion about it. Only Nikola Tesla could have been the richest man in the world had he have taken a license fee for the transmission of AC current. But so the idea of having something like this gives the sense of possible to allow people to say, we can operate around the world knowing the standard that we're going to operate by, knowing which countries have recognised the standard and are embodying it in their policy, in their legislation, in their actions, in their culture. As Michelle said at the beginning, we are in a competition against the status quo. Like that is the pace that we must fight against, because the status quo is not good enough and we must fight against it. And this standard is about lifting the bar so that companies can act ahead of government, and where necessary, government can follow. Australia has got a lot of issues, and we are overly reliant on our resource sector. Critical minerals do present a huge opportunity for us, but technology is fundamentally, I truly believe, our salvation to national security, especially because we are regionally and trade locked with China. And fundamentally, if we don't do something about that, then that is going to hurt us as competition increases.
One of the things I think many people have noticed is that trust in institutions isn't exactly at an all-time high, not just in the United States, but broadly. And government can widely be seen as, a little bit slower to innovate, perhaps, too large to move nimbly to get things done and get those results. How do you think the tech standard fits into that? Can it offer up new opportunities? I mean, we've talked a lot about the benefits that it can bring, but, you bring up some of Australia's challenges. How do you think this could kind of, fit into some of the existing challenges, and how do we navigate them in that?
So I think that one of the greatest things about the standard is it's not about compliance so much as it is about behaviour. And that's truly the fundamental aspect, and why the principles that embody the desire for advancing freedoms, about being human-centric and caring about humanity, like those aspects of this standard is not traditional for typical standards that are about compliance and checkboxes. Fundamentally for Australia, and I think for us and how we progress, considering, other than being known to be the lucky country, we are the plucky country. Sometimes we like boxing above our weight. We do have the boxing kangaroo. Ultimately, it's about stepping up, and I think we're willing to do that. And this standard, I think, is something that gives us a sense of there's a level playing field, and we can step up into that level playing field with the great guns.
I'd love to open it up to the audience for anyone that might have some questions for our panel. We have one here.
Thank you. My question is for Dave. What are some concrete steps that innovators and policymakers can take today to align with the trusted tech standards? Really, what's next coming up? Looking forward. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the question. So I run a nonprofit applied research institute, and we're a trusted third party. That's the nameplate that we use, and we're an action-oriented nonprofit, which is different than some others. And so let me give you the action items, right? Your homework, what to do next. Really, for a standard to have impact, I'd encourage you all to do some very simple things. So I'm from the Midwest. We keep things pretty straightforward. Number one is actually read it. It's not that long, 8 pages. So actually read it. Take time to read it. Number two is think about it. Don't just put it away, let it collect dust, but actually consider what it means for you and your organization. And then number three is talk about it and get other people involved. I think if we do those things, we'll be much, much further ahead next year at this time than we are today. This is my little plug for tech diplomacy at prf.org. Check it out and drop a line if you want to get more involved. And I really think, hearkening back to Michelle's comment from before about pacing threats, this really becomes then the pacing opportunity for those of us in this room.
Any other questions? I can't really see. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I don't see any. Oh, there's one. Right there.
My name is Eric Nelson. I'm recently retired U.S. ambassador. Somebody mentioned that government cannot move quickly, government cannot innovate. And I want to push back on that.
Guilty.
Because as a lifelong public servant, I'm familiar with that diagnosis and have done my best to push against it. I also see that government is perhaps the only way, or the better way to organize competitors to be cooperators. So when we decided it was a national goal to put a man on the moon, President Kennedy declared that goal, in short of a decade, we achieved it. That was government. Government organizing the best of America's efforts. So as we look to the challenges of 2025, I'm not sure what my question is, but I want to put this thought back to the panel of how do we channel, this is not either government or private sector. This is about channeling and organizing competitors to achieve this common goal. And can you expand on that and help me really embed that?
Well, I'll start, and then I think others may. But I'm 100% in agreement with you that government. Sorry that I'm covering, but the light is right in my eyes here. Governments have shown, in collaboration with the private sector, there's some great examples worldwide of how they have actually implemented trust in systems that have enabled transformation. And I'm going to give you an excellent example of this. Is a project with the Ministry of Health in Germany. Germany, one of the most privacy-sensitive countries in the world, they had a mission. They wanted to facilitate citizens' access to their data so that they can optimize the e-prescription system. And it was a great collaboration between the Ministry of Health, IBM, and other companies, Intel included. And we were able to deliver that. And today, there's 2 million transactions a day on some of the most privacy-sensitive data that they've executed. They're going to expand that to full health records. 17 million transactions they're expecting to be able to process a day, and again, on some of the most privacy-sensitive data. So that's a great example of the government stepping up, collaborating with the private sector, using that foundation of trust to transform a very important process for their countries, and something that we can then scale to other countries and maybe facilitate cross-country collaboration for things like medical research. So that's why this idea of trust and transformation and how they come together is so important. And you're absolutely right, governments are there stepping up, collaborating with the private sector to make this happen.
Ken, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I've worked at many companies that benefit from the public-private partnership. But it has to be something that we agree we need to be pushed on, that individually a tech company is there for public traded company, is there for shareholders. It's there to optimize profitability. It's often not there to work with competitors unless there is an economic advantage, which is why I think you're absolutely right. Government steps in to help guide that thinking and help guide that collaboration when it turns into be a national imperative, not just a single company imperative. You know, and there's also cases where companies do come together spontaneously for the good of developing a technology without government intervention. So that all happens. Just like in government organizations, I've seen innovation happen that then gets moved out into private industry. So there is always that range. To say there isn't is to say, well, I have a very selfish reason I'm gaining some advantage by saying it. Doesn't mean it's true.
If I can jump in real quickly, I actually served as a chief innovation officer for the state of Indiana for about 7 years. And so to see innovation within state government, had that ringside seat. I would also say, though, to sort of split the difference here, the natural momentum of government is not necessarily toward dynamic innovation. That's really traditionally the private sector. And that's the power of when you have free-minded individuals that can explore their creativity and monetize that creativity. That's really where you see dynamic growth and innovation. But bringing it back to a tech standard, if you cede over that concept then to government, that's the real risk. And so that's where we need individuals and companies to commit to this standard so that they can do business together more effectively.
One of the areas that we're actually seeing this play out in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence is energy, the need for compute, and where are we going to build these data centers? Who's going to do it? Are we allowing foreign money into it? I mean, a lot of these companies, OpenAI obviously leading the way, but many others that are actually kind of teaming together, having these conversations as a block on Capitol Hill. In some ways, that's incredibly productive. It seems like they have a common goal to increase the capacity for compute so everyone can kind of get ahead. But it does kind of raise the question of, you know, who's in the driver's seat ultimately. And I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts about how I think AI in particular is really shifting the power dynamics in terms of who knows what we need, who has the funds to do it, who's willing to move. I think this is kind of a different time in tech that we haven't seen before.
Well, from a public policy perspective, I do want to say that there are ethical challenges that we also need to be very mindful of, even as we push for public-private partnerships and to design, I think it's a design issue, to design in the kind of way that we are following as much as possible industry approach as against specific companies' approach. The reason being that regulatory strengthening within government has to precede the kind of conversation that we seem to assume that government can lead, because the knowledge asymmetry already puts advantage a lot on the side of private sector. And yet, government's role is so important. But if government is not competent enough to regulate, then we might have a situation where we distort what we really do need to exist for the innovation to be consistent and to be constant. I am afraid of hijackers of what the public good should be. And yet I am a strong proponent of the markets. But I believe that in designing the approach we will take on this, to be very wary of the ethical challenges and to also design that into the framework for the public-private partnership that's necessary.
All right, everyone. Do we have any other questions? Oh, I see one right in the back.
Hi, my name is Ben Bierman. I'm from Guidehouse. I think in the international standard setting arena, China's been beating the US a bit on setting standards on things like quantum and 6G, getting their preferred standard set. And when they don't, they can turn to bilateral standards agreements with countries in the global south, people that are willing to sign those agreements. And so my question is, how do you see these tech standards advancing US interests in those international standard setting bodies and making sure we continue to keep like freedom and privacy at the heart of international standards?
As someone who's done standards for years, that's a really good question. And I'll just make the blanket statement, something when you've worked in standards, you know this explicitly. Whoever shows up and puts the effort in, whoever offers to write the documents, whoever puts people who will show up for every committee meeting wins in standards. They drive the process. We have seen this happen in 5G, where two companies showed up, put a lot of effort in, wound up driving the definitions. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, if everyone else sits back and says, I'll just take whatever you give me, yeah, that's a problem. And this comes back to countries showing up, companies within the country showing up and participating and putting the same type of effort in. This is back to the co-opetition question. If you're not going to show up and put the time in, you're going to get whatever that organization puts out, provided people think that organization's output should be followed. There's no simple answer. It's show up and contribute. This is something US used to lead. Now China's leading. This is a solvable problem. No one's stopping a company wishing to participate and make sure that a nation's technology interests are reflected. Nothing is stopping you from showing up at those organizations.
Did anyone else want to add to that?
So I might add that I'm a big fan of my Harvard Business School professor, Clayton Christensen, who came up with disruptive innovation theories, and he talks about low-end disruption, where there's a reason why there's more Android phones than iPhones. It's because Android operates with high gross margins at the bottom end of the market. This standard is far more agile than traditional standards, and that creates an opportunity for it to accelerate and be more prolific and ubiquitous than traditional standards. And that is the opportunity that the Institute and that all of you here in the room can take, is that we can get out there faster and be more effective and ultimately win the day as a result of the way this has been developed and designed and can be used.
Well, we're out of time, but I would encourage everyone in the audience to kind of direct any feedback.
Say just one thing?
Of course.
Thing? I think everyone who was in this room really should go and listen to what Michelle said again. I thought that her speech was brilliant. I don't understand how the US became the winner acting like a loser. You know, I mean, you invited me to speak. And, you know, where I come from, we call a spade, not an agricultural implement.
We can take it, don't worry.
Yeah. Because, I mean, look, the US has been a natural leader in a lot of the things that we've seen. And suddenly, it appears as if all that the US and Europe is obsessed about is China. China said, China did, China. can we get back to the place where the natural talents that we've seen this country exhibit gives it the confidence to continue to do the things that matter for global prosperity, but to do it with the lessons of why it should not repeat some of the mistakes that it made in realizing that the world does not begin and end in the US. That's so important. A policy approach, a foreign policy approach that realizes that you have lost people, you have lost countries that really loved America simply by not paying attention to what some of your actions were doing to these other countries. Just get a better design of foreign policy. On my continent, a survey was done on democracy and other systems of government. Overwhelming majority, 67%, said they prefer democracy still today than any other system of governance. However, 37% only said that democracy is delivering. And we know that there are many dimensions. I am one of those Africans that insist on Africa taking responsibility for its problem. But beyond Africa taking responsibility, we do know that there are global rigidities that also stand in the way of even the most well-governed country in Africa. The US, as a proponent of democracy, needs to understand that it can get some of these conversations around what creates global prosperity, more inclusion into that topic. And it would change the dynamics of who you need to be worried about.
Right, the competitive does not have to come at the expense of inclusion. Yeah. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, but I would encourage the audience before we wrap up to direct any feedback as you look through the Global Tech Standard to techdiplomacy@prf.org. Thank you, everyone.